Immigration wars, definitely. Not physically us, countries invading us to give us more immigrants by the country, but allowing their citizens to come in, has now reached to a level where internally the European Union is actually beginning to fracture on the ideas of immigration. And I think that we're seeing a big division over the last few years, politically, but now I think nationally. And the announcement today, this morning, I think it was early in the mornings, as you can see here from the Visegrad, breaking 50 minutes ago, but that was obviously when I put it up, was actually really, really surprising in some ways that Poland has done this, but actually not surprising in so many others. But what they have done is they've decided that they're going to introduce border controls between Germany and Lithuania, which is literally a prevention of Schengen from working.
I was going to say, what happened to the sacred Schengen zone?
Exactly. This is really...
This is one of the 4 pillars of the European Union, wasn't it?
It is.
Free movement of people, capital, goods and services, or something like that.
That's right. And that free movement of labour is beginning to become an issue.
Really?
Because I'll come to it in a moment.
Only some plucky Brexiteers had warned them all those years ago. If only someone had told them, by the way, that's not tenable.
I'm going to have to pull out one of my videos from the European Parliament and say, this will not work, racist. No, this will not work.
Well, who could have imagined?
So it's really quite shocking. And this comes obviously on the board of lots of other things that are happening. What I found fascinating about this is, as I was reading through some of these, you got here from Visegrad, they talk about the army will be sent to the borders.
Before we go on, I just want to make it clear that's not a picture of it in process, right? I mean, don't get me wrong, I can appreciate the Poles coming out into the streets and cheering for it, but I'm pretty sure that's just a military parade.
I did actually wonder whether at the beginning this was actually the Poles beginning to get onto the borders of Germany. So right. It's our turn now.
Yeah. The entirety of Europe just looking like a risk board, backing the troops up.
Nothing new under the sun.
So I think this is a good news story, actually, to be honest, because it's really bringing the issue of immigration up into the elites that they can't hide. DW News, the Germans are saying it will impose temporary checks with Germany and Lithuania starting next week. Tusk says the measure is aimed at reducing irregular migrant crossings.
Oh, really? So if Angela Merkel unilaterally allows millions and millions of foreigners to settle in Germany, and you have the Schengen zone. I mean, we said exactly this, like word for word back in the day. It was so obvious this was going to be a problem, and now we've got to this.
Germany had a massive Turkish problem already. Huge Turkish problem, which caused enormous amounts of criminality in certain parts of the country that they can't even get control of the gangs that are controlling the Turks.
Integration came so fast, didn't it?
And then suddenly you throw in a whole load of Turks and Kurds, and Syrians and Kurds into there, and that created lots of divisions between the two of them. And now you've got them trying to move across the border, particularly the Africans, apparently. And I came down here. Someone put in there, it's because you're smuggling migrants like some petty criminals that you are, in fact, are Nord Stream. Because there's a lot of allegations going on in Poland that Germany, since it closed its borders, and I'll come to that, is allowing all those migrants who have coming to Germany literally to go across without being checked. Does that remind you of something happening in France to Britain across the channel?
Yeah, I could believe it. Again, like Germany took on in a really zealous way the sort of most high-minded liberal values, and they're realizing actually it'd be better to just shuffle these off to other people. I mean, do you remember they were demanding that everyone else take their fair share of Merkel's illegal immigrants? Sorry, my fair share of Merkel's illegals is 0. I don't want any of these people, so why are they here?
We have to take illegals because of German guilt.
Yes. Yeah, that's precisely it. I don't feel very much German guilt. Sorry. No. I'm thinking I'm
going back to that time because I remember when this was all happening in 2014 and 15, and just millions were literally flowing in. And Merkel did what I termed at the time Merkel's monumental madness was to allow millions of Syrians to come in unchecked. And then we find out they weren't all Syrians by any way. You know, they came from Africa, they came from Bangladesh, they're coming in from India.
But they weren't mostly fighting age men, so there's that upside.
So that was great. And then you discover later on that, like, Bertelsmann, the woman who was running Bertelsmann's chain, was a best friend, you know, of Merkel. She was saying it's a great idea to bring them in because German industry needs all of this. We need young men because we've got a population decline.
Any young men.
Just looking at GDP crossing the border.
Yeah, that's it.
Incredible.
Yeah, so all those thousands of doctors, scientists, mass engineers that have all been trained highly in Syria's mass manufacturing industries who understood about BMW cars.
Yeah, but the thing that annoys me most about this, right, is if you were Syria, and you were like, oh my God, that's our GDP just leaving. You know, if you're like, you know, Algeria or Morocco or, you know, wherever, you'd be like, oh no, we need to keep all of these people in the country because we need them. Otherwise, our economy is going to collapse. Except the economies of these places didn't collapse. Yeah. They barely changed. In fact, they probably improved because actually what they're doing is offloading their criminals on us. And they knew it. And so they're like, yeah, great, get out. Someone else's problem.
The ones who couldn't work, a few of them did. Obviously, there was always some that, you know, at the top end of the tree. But we always look about 5%. But if you've got 5% of 29 million, it's not really a big enough amount to make an improvement in our GDP because that's the amount of people that have come into Europe in the last 10 years. So you've got all of this going on. And I kind of think, okay, Poland's stopped it. You know, there we are. Germans are turning around and saying this is not a good idea. And the measures are aimed to, according to World War II, did you know? I actually just had to glance through this a little while because some of the pictures are quite funny. It's to stop the transfer of illegal immigrants. So there's a big story going on.
So this is the sort of word on the ground.
The word on the ground is there. And I sent out some messages to former European MEPs from Germany to see if they can provide any of the evidence of that. Also, Peter in Scandinavia is turning around and saying that Poland's stopping the asylum laws as well from being applied, but I haven't seen anything evidentially to prove that. But it does try and go to show that Poland's stepping up. And I know that I was going to do a story on Poland this week because Poland has really got into a way where they're now turning on the Ukrainians in a big way, not only in the election, but you've seen people's pulling down the Ukrainian flags. They're complaining in areas to stop Ukrainians taking work because Ukrainians are pushing down wages and housing has increased. And there was a mass story of this over the last few weeks that has just really been impacting some of the concerns. And these have come out in the election of the president. And that was between the left wing and the right wing president. So I'm not surprised this is coming in the same way that Germany reacted to AfD. I think this is a reaction to the president being elected who was not a left wing Tuskite. So, but then again, why are the Germans complaining when they did the same in September of last year?
Well, they're complaining because the illegals are causing trouble in Germany, and they want them causing trouble elsewhere.
Yeah, that's right.
And that's literally why they're complaining.
So rather than working as the United Europe that they always said they dreamt of being, banishing them from the continent itself, we're just going to pass them around to our neighbours.
Yeah, it's past the immigrant parcel.
Because we're a team.
Yeah, that's it. That's it.
And that's how teams work.
Yeah. That's it. I'll screw my best player at the moment who's got the best GDP because it's better than us by pushing in those who can reduce the GDP. But I looked at this and I thought this was September. We know why they reduced it last year. Metz was in trouble with the AfD. They had, just the casual little bit of terrorism killing the German people at events across the country.
It's the same effect we're having here with Starmer and Farage. And this is why you get the Island of Strangers speech that Starmer then walked back on.
He did. Well, Farage has walked back on everything.
Well,
the weekend, didn't he?
Yeah, as if Farage is.
Yeah, we're not going to.
So someone's saying, "Oh my God, Farage is dragging Starmer to the left."
That's gold. I'm gonna steal that.
Oh, yeah, that is brilliant. I've got to admit. But I mean, look at Farage. What is he doing this weekend? It's like no to banning the burqa. No, we can't possibly remove halal because there's just too many here coming in.
Right.
No, we're not going to control the borders in the same way by getting rid. I mean, where does he start? I mean, at the moment, he's sounding. He is beginning to sound worse than Cameron.
He's sounding a lot like Chamberlain. It's like, they're too strong. We can't stop them. We have to appease them. It's like, sorry, what century am I in?
Yeah. No to deportations, no to grooming gang inquiry.
I don't want mass deportation.
I don't want any of that.
I just...
So Farage might be happy to be in Germany at the moment. So I remember at the time, Germany's now criticising Poland, but the neighbours criticised German move to extend the border. At the time, I think it was the Polish minister, Donald Tusk, denounced as unacceptable the border control.
For anyone who's not aware, Donald Tusk is a sort of ancient creature of the European establishment. Wasn't he president of not the Commission, but the Parliament?
He was president of the Parliament and also at one stage president of the Conservatives, the equivalent of the Conservative movement in the European Union, all of those in there. But what I just found is, look, this is September with Donald Tusk denouncing Germany's extension to temporary controls, and now he's imposing them as well. So this goes to show all the kind of crass teamwork that you're talking about. But along that, France, Belgium, Netherlands, Luxembourg, they all had a bit of a moan as well.
You can see that the reality of what they've chosen to do is catching up with them, right? They actually can't keep a lid on all of this.
That's right.
And so it's like, we're going to have to go to the right no matter what Nigel Farage.
Political survival necessitates this for them.
100%.
And they're just not beginning to pick up where that next stage, and this is part of it, that when you allow the doors to open in the same way, if you're anything to follow history, we allowed millions of people to move around Europe, and we had a population explosion in the 1300s in the UK that led to masses of people moving into cities. They couldn't feed themselves through droughts, and then came along the Black Plague and wiped out lots of people. But at the time, it wiped out also cows, sheep, and we couldn't feed ourselves. The same was happening across Europe. You looked at Constantinople when they were trying to recover themselves and becoming the Pope was back in there with thinking getting the Holy Roman Empire, and then they allowed the borders to open from the east, overran them and just destroyed them all again. So history at different stages has showed what happens when you get mass populations in huge numbers come into areas. It causes conflict. It causes a real demand on services. And what have we got at the moment? Housing, hospitals.
So what do we have at the moment? Well, not services. Like that.
Everything's declining. And yet here they are moaning at one another when each is trying to solve the borders. And I think you said we can go in next on that. So, you then have this map, how Germany's borders closures jeopardize the Schengen area. Well, absolutely. Of course it does.
The Schengen area is unworkable liberal dream nonsense. Like, why would you think this is desirable or something we can actually do?
I mean, I just find it really. We've been saying this for a long, long time.
Didn't Keir Starmer just capitulate on the Schengen area with Gibraltar as well?
Yes.
He did.
Unbelievable. So Germany's like, and Poland's like, no Schengen for us, thanks very much. And Keir Starmer's like, no, go ahead.
Well, the issue about that border, which no one's going to pick out at the moment, is that if you are one of these people who's just moving around, let's just say you've come across from the Moroccan side into Spain and you get across, and there's a lot, people don't talk about that Western Mediterranean route, but it's still thousands, and we might have a picture of it at the end. They can now come all the way down to Spain and cross into Britain. And they will be regarded. They can claim asylum.
They can
in Gibraltar.
Yeah,
because we've opened the borders.
What stops the Spanish from literally just channeling them down there,
absolutely.
saying go claim in Britain? They give you loads of benefits because they're a rich country.
In the same way that the Republic of Ireland is doing with Northern Ireland at the moment, which I would close the border and remove all rights to the Irish, despite from being able to stay. So we've got people like the Jean Monnet Professor of European Law talking about this, and these are people who are funded by the EU. It's testing European unity. I agree, absolutely. Thank goodness. I don't know why that's come back in there.
I remember about 10 years ago, in fact, leading up to Brexit, I was like, look, I don't think the European Union is actually long for this world. I actually think that it's such an artificial project that any sort of severe strain put on it will actually cause some real issues. And this is one of those sort of under the hood issues.
Yes.
If it was an external issue like Russian invasion, that actually would strengthen the European Union. But this is something completely different, and I think that we're seeing the cracks now.
If I was Russia, I'd leave it alone.
Yeah, absolutely.
If I was Putin, I'd turn around and say, you're actually destroying yourself. Because economically, if we looked at 2008 and the financial crisis in which Goldman Sachs effectively persuaded the European Union to use the sacrificial lamb of Greece to destroy a whole generation of people, actually also destroy a generation of people in Spain as well at the same time, but in a different level. They allowed the financial crash. That was a much more existential issue. So they used it as an opportunity to gather more power into themselves, and they thought that would help them issue bonds. Let's do it like a country. But the under the hood issue, as you're saying, is this. This is much more significant. And if I was someone like who really wanted to do damage to ourselves, Putin would just ignore it. I'm not going to bother invading Europe. Why would I? Because I don't want this issue. I don't want this.
I've got enough multiculturalism of my own. Thank you very
absolutely.
Much.
I don't want it. Yeah. But I just wanted to run through with this as we're talking about Germany and Poland. There, you've got the hypocrisy of them, one complaining about another when they do it, and now they're complaining when they're doing it. But hang on a minute. Slovenia did it in December, and that went under the radar. How many people were aware that internal borders in Croatia and Hungary were blocked by Slovenia?
Thing is, if the European Union starts making a big deal out of this sort of stuff, then other people start getting it in their mind, oh, this is actually something we can do then.
Yeah.
This is something that actually works, is actually good for you. Yep. And actually one of those immutable pillars of the European Union that we heard about so much during the Brexit negotiations, well, actually it's not so immutable. Yep. Actually. It's not so timeless and eternal.
And you've just picked up on something I'm going to go to in a moment. So I'm just going to whip through these here to talk about Italy. They announced it at the G7 summit in June of last year. Yeah.
Didn't even know.
Again, we're going to do it. And they announced it in the G7. So there's Slovenia. Yeah. There is now Germany. There is now Poland. There is, and we've got Hungary on a different level altogether. I'll talk about. So G7 meetings. And then internal borders, what has changed? Netherlands and Norway have announced their intention to reduce border controls. Dutch started from 9th of December, lasted 6 months. That's what Geert Wilders, again, under the radar. Yeah. No one really massively in this country talking about it.
No, I didn't know.
Now look how many countries are doing so.
How many countries are left in the Schengen area?
Yeah, and that is when you come out and see this from the European Parliament. The request from the Netherlands government comes out, and I think, or maybe it's just missed. I actually had the legislation from the European Union and the list of countries. Maybe is that it? No,
it's all right. Just tell us.
I'll come back. The European Union actually has a list of all the countries that have applied.
Right.
For amendments, and if I find it, I'll put it back up on there. I thought we had it.
How many countries is it in the Schengens? It's 29 or something.
It's 29, yeah. and literally 10 of them, or possibly 11, are now applying these temporary rules on Schengen. Half of them are applying them, and one of them is avoiding it at all, completely, because didn't the European Union sign up in May of last year this pact on migration and asylum, which said this is where we can do the point you raised, share it amongst our mates. We're a team, guys. Look, we get 3 million a year coming in. Go on, Holland, you have 500,000. You know,
I think it was Lucas' point, but I think it was well made.
The irony to all of this, of course, as well, is just the fact that in their efforts to artificially create some European superstate of harmony and peace and love, of course, you know, all the problems that they've made to import, you know, that they've imported into Europe have actually made quite a strong European identity. You know, just not the one that they wanted or were anticipating. For patriots and people going, hang on, this is actually a really precious civilization that we've got here, and the European Union are taking it from us.
I don't think it's doing anything to damage the national identities either. If anything, I mean, the increase of the borders seems to be an emphasis on nationalism, frankly, in Europe.
I kind of think that to a certain extent, you know, Brits, the liberal Brits here, those on the left in the centre, really misunderstood some parts of what's happening in all across Europe, as the general Europeans actually quite like their Europe. They actually quite like the fact that they go off in lederhosen and drinks tankards of beer without having someone with a burqa serve it with them.
Just like we used to like our England.
Yeah.
You know?
And whilst we have gone down to a level that many of them now, when they come over on holiday, see and just do not like, they're beginning to see it when they go to Paris. I mean, if you ever go to Paris, I mean, it doesn't look like France at all.
No.
I feel like I'm in Morocco or somewhere like that. It's got nice buildings, but it just you rarely see a Parisian unless you're in that really exclusively French area. So it's either tourists or those who have moved in there. And it's quite frightening moving around the railway stations. Rome is starting to get like that in certain pockets. Right. And that's really, really quite concerning on there. And I think even the mafia, the Ndrozi, who were profiting from this extensively, have started to go, oops, we have actually made a bit of a mistake on this themselves.
Reverse migrating.
Well, they need to consider that because they've got a big profit margin.
Make them an offer they can't refuse.
Can I just talk about? I think your view on the British EU file libtype is, I think that's a really interesting point, because they being outside of the European Union and kind of remote from it are starting to look like dinosaurs, like some sort of like museum piece. Because you still see the sort of Mike Galsworthy types where they're just like EU no matter what, blah 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 blah, and yet on the continent it's starting to look a lot like not the EU that he remembers. Right, change is happening, but in the British Europhile mind, the EU has crystallized into the sort of 2011, 2012 Merkel-led, coalition of liberal end-of-history nations. Whereas this is starting to look more and more like something out of, I don't know, like Children of Men or something. It's the borders are coming down and everyone's like, no, the hackles are up. We're nice dream, but we're dealing with reality here, right? Whereas the Britlib has just been like, living in a daydream about these things, and has not changed with the times.
No, they're still going on holiday and thinking it's all like Barcelona, unless you're being robbed by the Albanians and Romanians going down the Ramblas, and they still think that they're in some lovely part of France on holiday.
Well, they probably go to like the south of France or something.
And
there's no immigrants.
Great. Well, that's where they go, and they're just not seeing what's happening in all the cities and towns in the same way it's occurring here. And this pact on migration, I just always thought was wrong in principle anyway. The idea that we distribute it, and if you don't want it, you just pay for it. And then almost immediately that Geert Wilders came in, he got a letter from half of the people who'd signed this particular pact on migration saying, well, we should renege it. So they've got it in place. Obviously, Orban is the great leader of the opposition on there, and now you've got the rise back perhaps of the conservative movement in Poland to take control again. And all he needs to do is get a good percentage of those. If Geert Wilders could get his act together and work within the system to be strong enough to do so, if Poland was able to be more strong on this, along with Slovenia and Hungary, you'll be in this situation where he said we should reverse it, because at the moment, Orban doesn't care. He says, I'm paying $1 million a day, but I'm not going to allow anyone in.
Yeah. I mean, I would rather pay $1 million a day and not allow anyone in. But I just want to show, the Britlib needs to remember, this is what your beloved Europe looks like right now. This is a photo of it.
Yeah.
Like, your liberal dream is over. It's gone. That Europe no longer exists.
And just look at the border. That's Serbia coming in. He's got this on one side. It's a big fence. All of those on the left are not Europeans.
Yeah, you can see the Middle Eastern men.
Yeah, they're Kurdish. They're coming in from Syria. They're coming in from Afghanistan.
There's one kid there, though, so they at least found the one child who's with them.
Yeah, I just produced the research for that Labour MP that was on Question Time, who said all the men and women coming across the boat. So I did turn around to him and say, look, it is 78.3% of them are men, so I suppose you're right.
This is the thing. I genuinely think that they live in that kind of dreamy, false consciousness, liberal reality where it's just like, it doesn't have any bearing on what's actually happening.
And what's more, they don't seem to have come to terms with the fact that it was their intransigence on every single one of these liberal fantasies. If they'd been willing to give an inch in Britain on any of those issues, the vote could have gone the other way. Bear in mind it was only 2%, but they couldn't. No. They weren't willing to give an inch, and in doing so, here they are screaming 10 years later.
Well, that inch is now the mile that they're facing now.
Yes.
And also, I think it feeds into their geopolitics. I mean, I looked at it. They spent over 150 billion euros in Africa through the various African funds to try and prevent this. And it's still not stopping the Africans coming in because the money's been wasted in their way that they do so. And
it's also telling the Africans we've got loads of money to waste. Come on over.
Yeah.
It's such a bad idea.
That's true. And then we also allowed regime change to help because it suited us to be able to kind of destroy Syria rather than saying, well, we're going to put our Al-Qaeda in, who was actually probably behind, if not some of his colleagues behind the 7/7 bomb that we're actually supposedly looking back on today. And he's now be shaking hands with our foreign minister.
So in the interest of time, is this working?
No. So I'm going to end up on this because I'm ending up this. The news was that we've had a huge reduction in Q1 this year of 20,000. So instead of 338,000 coming in next year, it'll just be around 280. So
that is an improvement.
So I think that's an improvement for them. That starts it, but that's what Europe is going to face. Yep. Another 250,000 coming in on all the routes this year. So I think it's starting to see the collapse around us, and this kind of EU migrant